And good morning, church. Good to see you this morning and glad that you could be here. Glad that those of you that are online and watching us through live stream are able to tune in as well. Really appreciate the comments you got as we kind of sorted through some of the transmission issues through the live stream. I think we've got that dialed in, but you had very constructive and very helpful comments on that, and we appreciate it. And those of you that are traveling, we know that we've had some people watching from around the world, and we're glad you're able to tune in as well. Thank you for our international people. Glad to have you. What a great day. Tom Walker on singings, fantastic. Jeff Smith on prayer. We have Wayne Traylor on Lord's Supper. Man, what a good day. What a good day to worship God. I hope you enjoy the time we have together to worship God. Time is what we're going to focus on even right now. When we talk about time, the time we spend with Jesus. You ever think about that? And the way that the time impacts the way that you are as a person, your emotional state, your sense of being, the consequence of time with Jesus. There is an emotional aspect to that. The way life changes, and that's really what time is. It's a way that we measure changes of states of being or place. We give it numbers, but really there's other ways that we can measure time as well. Our change of an emotional development. Think about it in Acts chapter 1, what it must have been like for the disciples. What must it have felt like for the disciples in Acts chapter 1? And read that with me as Jesus is ascending into heaven. What that must have felt like. When you think about what they had been through before, where they were at that moment, what they were anticipating in the future, and here they are in a moment, very present in a moment of time, and there's an impact it's having on them. Even being with Jesus, where they've been with Jesus, and what they anticipate with Jesus. You could measure that in an emotional capacity for sure. Verse 9 of Acts chapter 1. Now, when he had spoken these things, while they watched, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. This man that they had walked with and dedicated themselves with and ate with and listened to and had been corrected by, they'd given everything to him. And now he's going up out of their sight. And while they looked steadfastly toward heaven as he went up, behold, two men stood by them in white apparel, who also said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will so come in like manner as you saw him go into heaven. He's coming back. So there's hope. And not just hope, there's the anticipation of ultimate victory. Because when Jesus comes again, that is when you're taken up and you're going to be with him forever time in heaven in a completely perfect eternal life where there is no death and there is no tears and there is no suffering. What manner of emotional being must they have been in that moment? Even as they reflect back to who they were when they first met Jesus. John chapter 1, when Andrew brought Peter, we found the Christ. Luke chapter 5, when Jesus told them to cast their nets over the edge of the boat, and they had been fishing all night long and caught nothing, and now there's a bounty. And they realize this guy's very different. He's not just a teacher, there's something very different about him. Is this the Messiah? Is this the Christ? Is this the person that we give ourselves to? Peter responds by throwing himself down before Jesus. That's an emotional reaction. Very humble, but in that moment, recognizing it. And now, in this moment, in Acts chapter 1, thinking back to who he was at the beginning and what he had become through all that time. You could mark it in various ways. I'm going to use animals to represent those time because animals are fun. You could be scared, like a cat, full of anxiety. You could be frustrated and just like, I'm done. You ever done that in moments when you're frustrated? You're just like, I'm done. I'll go to sleep and maybe it'll go away. You could get angry as well. You've done that in moments where time or your situation hasn't unfolded. This is my favorite one, not to do it, but to watch from a distance, because inevitably it'll become funny later in life, hopefully. I remember school teachers losing their cool. I always love those moments, respectfully. And then joy. There's joy moments as well. How do you deal with time? How do you deal time and market and feel about changes in your life that occur over time? Now, we do it. We do it. We absolutely. You can measure the life of a human being by an emotional state throughout time. You think about when a baby's born, the emotions that come with that. Now, if you don't have a baby, I promise there was emotions that are tied to you being born for sure. If you're a first-time parent, those emotions are very different, because I hear your conversations than if it's your third kid. And some of you, your fourth and your fifth kids, okay? There's fear, there's anticipation, there's excitement, and you got that newborn baby, and you're like, oh, what's he going to become? What's she going to do? And are we going to be good parents? And will this thing survive? Don't shake your babies. Yeah. There's a lot of emotions with that. And then when that kid becomes 2, and if they do go through the terrible 2s, you're like, what have we created? How did we fail? And they go through all their great excitement. But then they get 5 or 6 or so, and they're learning to read, and they're writing, and they're making cards. And I see this quite a bit. There's a moment where sometimes the parents will look back on when they were babies and so innocent, and they'll hold a blanket or a little pair of shoes or a teddy bear, and they're like, oh, why couldn't they, can we have that for a little bit longer? And there's a yearning for these really, really good moments. And you know there's better moments to come until 12 and 13 when you're like, how can it hate me so much? How can it have so much anger inside of it? But then 18, 19, they graduate, 17, 16, whatever it is. And then you're so excited for possibilities. It's all the emotions, isn't it? There's moments in life where you look at a person's growth and development. There's fear moments and anxiety moments. There's what have we done? I just want to sleep through it. There's anger moments. We hope those don't get too bad. But then there's joy, isn't there? I love this picture a lot. Have you seen a happier dog ever? This is not a noble steed, but is the happiest thing in the world. I'll make it a bigger picture. It's so huge and happy. But isn't this it, really? When you think about satisfaction and contentment in life, when you think about that point where you want to sum it all up in a moment, that if there is a change, there's a thing before you got to that moment, and now you're there. Enjoy. And however you express that, you're there in the moment. I think the disciples must have felt that when they realized it's all very, very real what they've done with Jesus. And all that time that they spent and gave and dedicated to Jesus, it meant everything. It was literally changing their lives, but it was changing the world in the midst of it too. And no matter what was coming ahead of them in the book of Acts, and it was a lot, the scary moments, the anxious moments, the frustrating moments, the anger, the anxiety, the joy in the midst of it, you see their skill level kind of go up as you measure the expanse of time going through their lives. It's incredible. Go to Acts chapter 20, verse 7. Let's look at how a particular figure unfolds in this. And as we read this story, and you may be familiar with it, it's where Eutychus is going to be involved, and Paul and his brethren are teaching. I want you to think of it in terms of the transition of time, the changes within the story, but also the emotional state of what's going on. How do you view the emotions? And if you were there in this situation, where would you be emotionally? It's very easy to read these stories as just a series of facts, but it's real people, and they're humans just like us. There are cultural differences. We're going to be in Troas, which is sort of up in that northwest corner of what we would call Turkey, but Asia Minor at the time. We've got Paul and his people. They've been traveling, and man, it's been something on those missionary journeys. In Acts chapter 19, he's just come out of that huge riot moment in Ephesus. Massive riot. And you can imagine the emotions that are going through in that sense simply because they dedicated themselves to Jesus. You move into Acts chapter 20, and they're traveling a little bit more, and they're going to be spending time in Macedonia. He's going to spend about 3 months in Greece. He'll go back to Macedonia. And it's important to read the front end and the back end of what we're going to focus on so you get some context of where they are mentally and in that transition of emotions. But they're so dedicated, so dedicated. You read down in those the earlier parts of chapter 20, and it starts giving you a list, and I think this is important. There were 7 men listed here that are traveling with him. And don't forget Luke, in which you'll catch a little hint of him in the midst of it too. But it says in Acts chapter 20, I guess we'll begin in verse 4. So Peter was with him, and Aristarchus, Secundus was with them, Gaius, Timothy, Tychicus, and Trophimus. And then it says, when they went ahead, these men going ahead waited for us at Troas. But we, that would be Paul and Luke, and whoever was with them, that was the we. But we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and in 5 days joined them at Troas, where we stayed 7 days. Fantastic. So they're waiting around for a particular moment, and it's going to be a worship service. 7 days they've been traveling, but he's with his friends. He's with his other people that are dedicated, and I think that has a positive effect on it as well. But in Acts chapter 20 and verse 7, we'll read it first and come back and talk to it. But I want you to think about the emotional state if you were there. Now, on the first day of the week, this is the first day of the week, we can relate. They're going to be gathered together for worship. On the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, so he's anticipating a thing to come up ahead, which was going to be that he's going to travel to a city called Assos, and he's going to do that on foot. It's a 31-mile trip on foot, so it's a couple of days. So he knows they're on the first day of the week. Whatever happens this day is great, and then tomorrow he's going to head off. They're going to go by boat, his friends, but he's going to go on foot. Now, you can imagine how you would mentally have to prepare yourself, emotionally how you would prepare yourself. They walk more than we do, but they're going to do this 31-mile trip on the road, 20 miles as a crow flies. But first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, he spoke to them and continued his message until midnight. So this isn't just a wham, bam, thank you, ma'am sort of service. They're in it, man. They're in it. And it is going to go on. These are those people that are hungering and thirsting after righteousness. And in the Sermon on the Mount, God said, you will be filled. And so they are being filled. Their worship service isn't just closing down. They are in it big time. And so, in continuing in that, even though he's got a trip the next day, he presses on. Where would you be in that moment? I know. You don't have to tell me. Sometimes we feel like it goes on a little bit in our modern world, don't we? Can we get out by 11:30? I will today. I'll get you out by 11:30. Doubters. I appreciate the honesty. Yeah, but what if you're there till midnight? How long could you hang in on it? How long could you hang in on that? And would you be excited in the midst of it? Oh, yeah, another song. Oh, yeah, we're going to be reading from that scroll, yes, again. How long would you be emotionally invested into that? Put yourself in this story. Well, there were many lamps in the upper room where they were gathered together. A fascinating detail that Luke puts in there. No one's exactly sure. There's some people that think he did it just to kind of note the fact that everything was very visible. At the least, it's that. Some people go a step further and think it's because there was accusations against Christians that they were doing things in the dark, and that the non-believers would accuse them of, seditionary things, or that they were up to no good because they were doing it in the dark. But here's a case where it's well lit, very well lit. And it could be as a demonstration also that there was numerous people there and everyone brought a lamp. So it was a big crowd, maybe any of that. But at the very least, it was well lit. It's midnight, dark outside, but not inside. Inside, there's worship taking place and there's teaching going on and the emotions, these people are in it. Okay, verse 9. And in a window sat a certain young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep. Some of you may be going, that's me. That's me in that story right now. Okay, no judgments there. And he was overcome by a sleep. And as Paul continued speaking, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead. I want you to now stop. I don't know how many times you read that, but did you ever think about the emotional state that just shifted in that room? We're like, we know what's going to happen, so maybe we read it pretty quick and we don't really think about it. But here you are in worship service and people are in it, and it's well lit, so they're seeing what's happening here. and one of your people is so in sleep, they fall out of a window. Can you imagine the emotional shift that just took place if you watched that? If that's one of your people who just fell, you shifted. If not, you're a monster. He fell from the third loft, the third story, the third roof, if you're into architecture of the time. Maybe that's about 30 feet. Picture our roof inside the building and he's falling down. If you saw that, what a disruption, what a moment, what a shift that you could measure by the emotional change. Elation and joy and praise to, oh no. For being honest, if you've been in a situation, it's much more horrific than that. Even if you saw it, these windows are open. They don't have glass. That would be typical at the time. It's only 30 feet. You probably heard the hit. And you're just like, whoa. You probably heard the hit. I grew up near cliffs. I grew up in a place where people climb all the time. Inevitably, people fell. When you know that sound, you know that sound. You know what the sound means. You went from elation and joy and triumph. It's the best night ever. Apostle Paul's coming through and he's teaching us with Luke and Sopater and Secundus and all these super dedicated Christians. What great joy. It's well lit up, and tragedy. Not a tragedy you just kind of mark and move on, but someone died in the midst of this. An emotional shift. Have to be. It says they knew he was dead. Well, what do you do in that moment? Do you lose it? Do you absolutely lose it? And you're scared and you're feared and anxiety, and so many people might be against us already, and now someone's died. It's an accusation. Some people may have just covered their head and tried to run away because they can't deal with it. Some people may have gotten very, very angry. Who allowed him to sit on that window? Who was not looking out for him? And they would have turned. These are human things. But what did Paul do? His emotional state through this is very interesting. He's preaching through midnight. He's been traveling. He's had to deal with riots. He's had people trying to kill him from the moment he became a Christian. And now in this moment, there's a massive tragedy going. All these people in a transitional state. He goes down and he comforts. He goes down and he comforts and he handles the situation, and he does it in a very godly way. We know it's a godly way because when you stop and think about what you know about the history of the Bible, this is not the first time that a man speaking the word of God has brought a young man back to life. You can go back to Elijah. You can go back to Elisha. And it's very similar in the examples of it, whether it's the Shunammite woman or Zarephath or either of those two examples. He goes down and he is directing these people and guiding them in a moment which could be incredible turmoil. It began in peace and excitement, and now turmoil and emotional dissonance. But he's going down and says, let me comfort you. And the Bible says that Paul went down and he fell on him. Very similar to the way Elijah and Elisha took care of their situations. And embracing him, he said, do not trouble yourselves, for his life is in him. And when they had come up and had broken bread and eaten and talked a long while, maybe there was that, we got through it. What do? We got through it. You're grateful. You had this incredible moment. And you see the power of God, that this guy was dead and now he's alive. Emotional things are happening really fast here. What do? You could say, that's enough for me, man. I'm done for the night. But that's not what they did. They went back up. And after he had eaten and broken bread, they talked a long while, even till daybreak. And then he departed on his 31-mile walk to Assos. What? How? How do you get to that point? When no matter what life throws at you in specific moments of time, that your focus is so given, that your emotional state is to worship and to praise and to comfort and to uplift and to be there for people. And then when it comes to the next thing, there's no indication of whining or complaining. There's no indication of throwing in the towel. It's, I'm on to the next thing. I'm on to the next thing. That's incredible. That's incredible. How do you do that? He's really interesting, Paul. He's very interesting. You know where he was in the beginning of his story, in which he was very dedicated to his Jewish teaching, and he had a fantastic teacher in learning. He was dedicated. I think these are the three things that bring us to that how, and I want to hit them because I think they also will affect how we navigate through those things with Jesus and our time. Whatever block of time you have in your life, whether it's the next 3 years, the last 3 years, 30 years, whatever it is, I want to make sure I'm doing that in a way that is pleasing to Jesus and that keeps him at the forefront. And that when I do go through a series of motions that may mark a time period, the negative ones, I'm going through them as swift as possible or not at all. If it is frustration, let it be swift. If it is anger, let it not be sinful. If it is fear, let it pass quick or not at all. I need to get to that place, we all do, that place where whatever life throws at us, I've got contentment deep inside of me. I've got joy for what I do and meaningfulness in life and purposeful in life. That's what Paul had because of the time he gave to Jesus and because how he allows that to navigate him through life, no matter what happens. You can mark his emotional state. Oh, he did have anger moments and frustration moments for sure. You can read that as he's dealing with some of the churches and the tensions that exist there. But he's doing it driven to God, for Jesus. I think it's helpful. He's always been interested, as I said before. Even as a young man, to go through the training he did, where it looked like he was headed to be, a Pharisee and quite a well-ranked and well-respected person, very educated in those Hebrew schools of teaching, to the point where the chief priests, the highest people, would give him tasks to do. Now, not agreeable for us as it was to lock up Christians, as we talked about in previous weeks. But he was given a really, really important task. Respectable. Dedicated. Always interested. But even as he was converted, that's that invited aspect of it. When he was converted, Jesus invited him into Christianity. And it was quick, wasn't it? To me, 3 days. Your life shifted that much in 3 days? That group of people that you were so determined against because you thought they were wrong, in 3 days in an encounter with Jesus where you listened to him because your interest was always in God, and this is the voice of God. That's your interest. That's your base. You get the invitation to follow him in truth. 3 days? It makes sense now. Yeah, it's going to cost. There's respect in that community, it's going to cost. There's relationships, it's going to cost. But the gain is God in truth. You thought you had it before, but now you do have it? Yeah, 3 days of fasting and praying. Yes, when Ananias says, arise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord. Yes, let that happen. And with intensity, he began to invest himself immediately into the cause of Christ. Immediately he began teaching that Jesus was the Christ. And from there, chart his story. These are ongoing things that he was completely and wholly dedicated to. And no matter the time period, he built that interest. He just built on it even more. When Barnabas would include him and come and get him to go do the work at Antioch in Syria, interested in it. Take me there, man. He was invited to do it. Yes, is what he said. And then he invested himself in it for a whole year, preaching and teaching. And when that opportunity came to go do the mission work in Acts chapter 13, when the Holy Spirit set them aside for him and Barnabas to do that work, yes, I am interested. I'll take that invitation and I will invest myself into it. You start to see a mentality based on the way he spends his time with Jesus, gives his time with Jesus, sacrifices for Jesus, finds joy in Jesus. It shifts who you are. And when it shifts who you are, you start to understand that these emotional markers, well, they start shifting to become more like Jesus. Because my interest is Jesus, the invitation is with Jesus, and my investment is within Jesus. My emotional state, my actions and physical state, my thoughts, everything that I do, my anticipations, it's all Jesus. There's got to be a side effect of that. There's got to be. And I think that's what we see in Paul. There are certain situations we see him and you're like, what? How? How do you have that attitude? How? How can you be so giving? How? How can you dedicate yourself so much? And it's this. We see him interested constantly and building on that. Building on it. No matter where he goes, he's continued to build his interest. We see these invitations that he has to participate in interactions with people. Yes, I'll take them. Why? For the cause of Jesus. And then he gives himself completely. There's no holding back. He's becoming more and more like Jesus. So Jesus is first in his life, but it's his time. It's not a little bit of time for Jesus. It's all the interactions are for Jesus. Even if when he's a tent maker, the work, it's for the cause of Jesus. His social interactions are for Christians and non-Christians with the hope that they'll become Christians. That's for Jesus. The opposition, when people oppose him, his thought is to convert them so that they're not the opposition, but they're the brethren. That's for Jesus. And his time is given to prayer, and his time is given for studying, his time is given for speaking for Jesus. That's how. It makes me think back even when he, as an old man, when you take him his younger life to his old man, this sums up his life. And I think in the emotional state, when you look at Paul, I can't help but think back to that dog, man. The joy of a life really well lived for Jesus. The joy you must have in saying, I gave it all. I ran the race. I fought the good fight. There is no regrets in this. I have contentment and joy because of Jesus. Well, that's a challenge. It's also an invitation. It should be something we're interested in because we can have that too. It's not in the Bible just so you can say, man, look how great Paul is. It's in the Bible so you can say, look what Paul did as a human being just like me. You can look at that example and say, I can have the same interest, I can have the same invitation, and I can have the same level of investment in that. I can do it too. This is an example given for us to follow on how to navigate that for Jesus with our time. We can do it as well. Go back to John 15 in the reading. I think the way that Paul must have thought about this is really intense, and this is another passage that maybe you've read numerous times, but I want you to think about it in the same way we did with Paul. What's his emotional state in this? How does he rest in this? How does it affect who he becomes as a person? But notice, as Jesus is speaking, it begins with an invitation. Abide in me. Abide in me. That is an invitation from God, Jesus, to exist in him, in the realm of his values and in the realm of his love, and in the realm of his care, in the realm of his life, in the realm of his anticipation of who you can be. You may not realize that fully yet, but he does. And he's inviting you to be transformed because of him and through him. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. You're not going to have that level of joy, that level of contentment, that satisfaction, that victory, that triumph, that emotional stability, unless your meaningfulness of life is found in Jesus, the true source of it all. Anything else that offers that to you is false. It is false, and it will fail you. But not Jesus, not ever. I am the vine, he says, you are the branches. I am the vine and you are the branches. He's illustrating this for the connection to take place. It's very easy to follow in simple teaching. I am the vine and you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered, and they gather them and throw them into the fire and they are burned. If you abide in me, and this is what he's focused on. There is a negative side if you don't. But let's focus on the good choice, the wise choice that you can participate in. If you abide in me, if you make that choice, and my words abide in you, he's opening up the door how to do that, you will ask what you desire, and it shall be done for you. Lord, I can ask anything I want. There's a really sweet Porsche at D. Patrick. Can I have that? No, probably not. Maybe. We'll see. If your desires match God's desires, This is talking about your will being the same as God's will. And you don't compromise on that. In fact, when you find out it's different, you shift. You make use of your time to shift. May I think like God as much as I possibly can, and more so tomorrow. And then I'm asking for the things that God wants. I'm abiding in Him, and He in me. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit. So you will be my disciples. Isn't this Paul? Early in his life, he did not abide in Jesus. He rejected Him. He fought Him. He opposed Him. Locked up his people. But when that opportunity came and that invitation for such a wicked person, when that invitation existed, he took it. When he realized it, he took it. 3 days. It was quick. And as soon as he was invited to be baptized and have his sins washed away because of the sacrifice of Jesus, he took it. And when that opportunity came to teach about Jesus, he took it. And even it meant that he was opposed to and threatened, he still took that opportunity, and he grew, and he changed, and he became that man we talk about today. But you can become quite similar. I'm so impressed with how the people with far more experience than me and wisdom and such have dedicated themselves to God, the sacrifices that they've made. You may think of people that you know right now, that you hold to a high regard because, yeah, I'm grateful for what they did as example, but I hope I can be half as good as they are. I think of previous elders that I got to know even when I was a young kid. Man, they were so impressive. I think of preachers that I studied with. Oh my goodness, they're so impressive. I got invited to speak later in this year with one of them, and man, that's a little intimidating. I was telling Alan, I was like, do I go before him or after him? Because what's going to happen there? It's humbling to be next to those guys, but I know I'm going to learn something, so I'm going to take that invitation. I think about the people that taught me in Bible class. I think about the people that have been patient with me, exceptionally so. And I'm grateful for it. Such a high level. They push me to be even greater, just as many as you do. But that's what we have to do with one another, isn't it? I should have high expectations of myself, not just for myself or my own glory, but for God's glory. You should do the same. And not just that, but for the other people in the congregation. We need one another for that. Yesterday we had our first men's meeting of 2024. I can't wait for more. But I love that as the idea, iron sharpens iron, that we're going to be there for one another, that we're going to lift up one another. And the invitation and the interest and the investment was all thrown out there. I was like, that's funny how that's really kind of matching up. When I come to realize it's always there, we just have to look for it and then engage it and then participate and contribute. It's different than thinking what's done for me. I don't think Paul thought that way. You wouldn't if you were the guy who was going to preach until midnight, anticipating a long day tomorrow, and then a tragedy happens, and then you help in that tragedy, the emotional toll that must be, but then you decide to keep on talking until daybreak, and then you go on your trip anyway, and you're grateful for it, enthusiastic about it. You probably get a nap in there somewhere, but what a life. That's offered to you as well. It's Jesus and our time. You can measure your interest in Jesus, but you can improve your interest in the Lord as well. And if you don't know how to do that, let's talk. There's a million ways that you can unfold that based on your skill set and what God's blessed with you. The invitation to participate in Christianity is always there. To become a Christian, and then more. It doesn't stop when you become a Christian. That's just the beginning. But to grow and to teach and to serve and to worship and to live and enjoy it, it's always there. And then to invest yourself, that's where it all comes from. We are blessed people with these opportunities, but it's Jesus first in our life that gets it started. That's where we'll close today. How do you handle your time? You've got time right now. Time right now. How will you handle that time with your relationship with God? I hope you are encouraged to say, yes, maybe I haven't thought about my interest in invitations and they occur all the time. Do I grab them? And how much will I invest myself? Am I holding back? Why? Why would I hold back from Jesus? Literally, the most important person I could ever dedicate myself to. The most important cause, the greatest value in life. Why would I hold back? We can talk about that. The answer is going to end up, don't. Whatever else you've chosen in life is a mistake. Just live Jesus. Live your family and your work and your friendships and your interests and your hobbies. Live that through Jesus. But always put him first. Give your time in that regard. You will always be blessed in that regard. Our invitation today, at this moment, to use your time is to consider your relationship with God, to consider it with Jesus. Maybe you've wasted time and you regret that. Maybe you've been angry with Jesus at some point. Let's work on that. Maybe you've been frustrated with how you've seen the church unfold in its not ideal state, and you look at the failures of those kind of things, but wrong thing. Look at the perfection and beauty of Jesus and consider how you can participate in making it better. Doing it right. Maybe you've been angry. Maybe you've been filled with joy, and you want true joy. Maybe it's time you come back home because you put church away from you for so long. Maybe it's time for you to become a Christian. It may be the time. How do you feel about your time? What will you do with your time? Today, if there's a way we can help you with that, please let us know as we stand and as we sing.